The sun was dipping below the rim of the canyon, bleeding orange and purple across a sky thick with the threat of rain. Wind whipped down the draw, carrying the wild scent of sage and the warning growl of distant thunder. Callie Walker pulled her hood tighter, her boots grinding against rock as she picked her way along the forgotten trail. Eyes narrowed against the oncoming storm. She wanted to beat the weather home, but the world had other plans. Rounding a bend, she stopped short. A horse stood in her path, a battered Mustang mare, gaunt ribs visible beneath a coat splattered with mud and blood. The mare's eyes were wild and glassy, flaring white at the edges, but she did not bolt. Instead, she planted herself in the narrowest part of the trail, head low, legs trembling, blocking Callie's way forward. Callie raised her hands, palms out. Easy. She took a step back, heart thumping. In the gathering dusk, lightning flashed, illuminating the mare's wounds, a deep cut above her shoulder, flanks streaked with dried blood, a swollen ankle that barely bore weight. The sight caught Callie's breath, sending her mind spiraling back. Faces in the sand, cries for help echoing through smoke, memories she'd spent years trying to drown. She clenched her jaw, pushing the old terror aside. This isn't Iraq. This is home. But the mare's eyes, so wide, so pleading, reminded her of soldiers she couldn't save. Friends left behind in the chaos. Callie felt something inside her shift. She crouched low, voice soft. You need help, don't you? The wind picked up, carrying a cold burst of rain. The mare flinched but did not move. Callie hesitated. She could turn back, head home, pretend she never saw this desperate creature. No one would blame her. Not in a county where wild horses were little more than ghosts, but guilt clawed at her, bitter and sharp. She knew that pain. She knew what it was to be left behind. Thunder boomed, closer now. The mare stamped, shivering. Callie stood, brushing wet hair from her face. Okay. I hear you. You win. She stepped slowly forward, speaking in low tones, her boots squelching in the thickening mud. The mare watched her every move, muscles taut, but did not retreat. When Callie was only a few feet away, she noticed something strange. The mare was glancing back over her shoulder, nostrils flaring, as if urging Callie to follow. What's back there? Callie scanned the darkening canyon, her instincts on edge. She could almost sense another presence, more eyes watching from the shadows, another secret waiting to be uncovered. The mare took a shaky step sideways, limping off the trail, pausing to look back. Callie hesitated, glancing at the thickening clouds and the hard, black line of approaching rain. Her cabin was a mile away, safety and warmth just within reach. She thought of shutting the door, turning the music loud, blocking out the world. That's how she'd survived these last few years. That's how she'd kept her ghosts at bay. But the Mustang's gaze wouldn't let her go. With a sigh that tasted of old regrets, Callie fell in behind the wounded mare, boots sloshing through mud as lightning crackled across the sky. The trail grew treacherous, rocks slick and hidden under growing pools of water. Callie's fingers curled into fists. Every step forward was a choice not to run, not to hide, but to try. The mare moved with dogged determination, every movement pained yet purposeful. Callie's mind raced with questions. Who had hurt this animal? Was someone out there even now watching? Each snap of a branch, each crash of thunder sent her pulse racing, but she pressed on, following the mare into the heart of the storm. As they descended deeper into the canyon, the world shrank to gray shadows and the pounding drum of rain. Callie stumbled over a root, catching herself on a boulder slick with moss. The mare waited, head turned, as if aware of Callie's every struggle. That silent companionship, unexpected, urgent, gave Callie strength. She realized with a shock that she wasn't afraid for herself. Not tonight. The mare needed her, and for the first time in a long while, Callie wanted to be needed. The trail finally opened onto a ledge overlooking a narrow, twisting ravine. Lightning split the sky, illuminating what lay below. A half-collapsed shack, its roof sagging under the weight of years, windows dark. The mare stopped, sides heaving, and let out a hoarse, broken whinny. Callie peered down, heart in her throat. She thought she saw movement in the shadows, something small and shivering near the shack. The wind carried the faintest sound, a whimper lost in the storm. The mare nudged Callie with her nose, urgent now. "Okay, I'm coming." With a final glance at the safety she'd left behind, Callie squared her shoulders and began to pick her way down the slick, twisting path toward the unknown, her boots splashing through water and fear alike. Every step was a promise she'd see this through, no matter what waited at the bottom. As the canyon closed around her, Callie Walker chose to follow a battered Mustang into the storm, opening the door to a rescue that would change everything. Rain hammered down in sheets as Callie slid and stumbled her way down the narrow, twisting path. Mud sucked at her boots, and the wind tore at her jacket, but the battered mare pressed forward with grim determination, never straying far from Callie's side. The ruined shack loomed below, skeletal, slouched, as if trying to vanish into the rocks and weeds around it. Callie hesitated at the edge of the clearing, every instinct screaming caution. The place reeked of rot and old pain, a stench that fought with the clean bite of rain in the air. Thunder rattled the canyon walls, making her jump. Still, the mare nudged her again, insistent. "Okay, I'm going." She drew a deep breath and pushed through the tangled weeds toward the shack. Its door was half off its hinges, swinging with every gust. Inside, darkness pooled thick and heavy. Callie fumbled for the flashlight she kept in her jacket, flicked it on, and swept the narrow beam across the floor. She froze. There, curled together in a filthy corner, were 3 foals, barely more than skin and bones. Their coats were patchy, smeared with dried blood and muck, eyes glassy with fever. One lifted its head, ears flickering weakly at the light, but made no sound. Another trembled, ribs heaving with every shallow breath. The third, Callie couldn't even tell if it was alive. It lay so still. For a second, Callie just stood there, overwhelmed. Her mind reeled with horror, rage, and helplessness. The storm outside, the darkness, her own shaking hands. It was all too much. But the battered mare let out a soft, desperate sound behind her, and that snapped Callie back to herself. Okay. Focus. She knelt by the foals, forcing her panic down. She checked each one, gentle but quick. All 3 were alive, but only just, dehydrated, cold, wounds on their legs and sides. One had a nasty gash along its flank that was oozing pus. The air in the shack was cold and damp. If she didn't get them out now, they wouldn't last the night. A bolt of lightning split the sky, so close it shook the walls. Callie jumped, then cursed under her breath. She was alone, a mile from help, 3 dying foals and a wounded mare depending on her, and the worst storm of the season bearing down. "But I've been in worse places," she muttered. Moving fast, she dragged a rotting tarp from one corner, shook the spiders off, and laid it out beside the foals. Next, she scoured the shack for anything she could use. old boards, moldy blankets, a coil of half-rotten rope. She rigged a rough stretcher from 2 boards and the tarp, tying knots with trembling hands. She worked in near darkness, heart pounding, mind racing with memories of battlefield improvisation. When one of the foals whimpered, Callie murmured to it, voice low and soothing, trying to steady them and herself. "All right, you're coming with me." She lifted the smallest foal first, bracing its fragile body with a blanket. It barely stirred. Callie's arms shook as she settled it onto the makeshift stretcher. She glanced at the door. The storm outside was ferocious now. Black sky lit by blue-white flashes, rain pounding so hard it felt like a living thing. She dragged the stretcher to the door and called to the mare, "Come on, help me." To her astonishment, the mare stepped up, ignoring her own pain, and gently nuzzled the foal, then pressed her shoulder against the stretcher's side. Together, woman and horse managed to haul the first foal into the clearing, shielded as best they could from the worst of the weather by the mare's broad body. It took 3 agonizing trips, 1 for each foal. Every journey up the path was a battle, the wind howling so loud Callie could barely think. Twice she slipped, nearly falling, but the thought of leaving any foal behind was unthinkable. The mare stayed close, sometimes blocking the wind, sometimes gently guiding a shaky foal with her muzzle. By the time Callie reached the last foal, her fingers were numb, legs caked in mud, breath coming in ragged gasps. Her body screamed for rest, but she forced herself to keep moving. The final foal was the worst off, barely breathing. She bundled it in the last dry blanket, whispering comfort. "You're safe now. I've got you." With the foals huddled together beneath a rocky overhang and the mare standing guard, Callie turned back to the shack. She grabbed what little she could salvage, an old raincoat, a rusty tin of oats, anything that might help. She forced herself to check one last time, making sure nothing, no animal, no cruel device was left behind. Satisfied, she stumbled back to the horses. Lightning illuminated the little group. 3 fragile lives and their battered protector, all trembling, all alive. Callie dropped to her knees, blinking rain from her eyes. "We're not out yet, but we're together." She looked at the path ahead. Uphill, slick with mud, rain still coming down in angry sheets. She'd have to get them all home somehow. The thought seemed impossible. But as she met the mare's gaze, something fierce surged inside her. She wasn't just fighting for herself tonight. She was fighting for them. "All right, let's move." She rigged the stretchers again, shifting 2 foals onto one, carrying the smallest in her arms. The mare limped alongside, nudging the other foal forward. Inch by inch, they climbed the trail, battered by wind and rain but refusing to stop. It took hours, long, grueling hours, before the lights of Callie's cabin finally glimmered through the storm. She nearly wept with relief. One by one, she carried the foals inside, settling them by the stove. The mare collapsed just inside the doorway, sides heaving, but her eyes stayed fixed on the little ones. Callie knelt by them, exhausted beyond words, soaked to the bone, every muscle shaking. "You made it. We all made it." As the storm raged on, Callie realized something had shifted deep inside her. She was no longer alone, not tonight. She had chosen to help, and that choice had made all the difference. The dawn after the storm was a bruised violet, gray clouds still drifting over the canyon, as if unwilling to let go of the night's violence. The air was sharp and cold, but inside Callie's cabin, A fragile warmth had taken hold, small and uncertain, like the breaths of the foals she'd fought so hard to save. Callie moved quietly around the single room, heart heavy with fatigue but restless, her mind turning over what came next. She'd dried the foals with every towel she owned, wrapped them in blankets, fed them water a sip at a time. The battered mare lay close by, eyes half-lidded, sides still heaving from exhaustion. The wounds along her shoulder and leg looked worse in daylight, raw and ugly, scabbed with dried blood. The foals were barely moving, but they were alive. That was enough, for now. A new fear gnawed at Callie as she crouched beside them. She'd done what she could, but she wasn't a vet. Some wounds were beyond her skill, and infection was a hungry thing. She needed help. Her phone was nearly dead, but she managed to get a single bar of signal by propping it in the kitchen window. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number for the local animal clinic. Dr. Elliot Briggs answered after 3 rings. His voice was brisk, but she heard surprise when she told him what she'd found. "You did what? 3 foals? And a wounded mare? You got them through the storm." "Just tell me what to do," Callie said, keeping her voice steady by force of will. "Please." Dr. Briggs listened, then promised to come as soon as he could. The clinic was 20 miles away, but he'd bring supplies and a truck. Callie hung up, shoulders sagging with relief. She glanced at the mare, who watched her with those deep, unreadable eyes. "You're safe," she said softly. "I promise." An hour later, a battered Ford pickup rumbled up her drive, mud spraying from the tires. Dr. Briggs stepped out, a tall, sandy-haired man with tired eyes, wearing jeans and a faded clinic jacket. Beside him, shy and blinking in the daylight, stood a boy of maybe 8 or 9, clutching a backpack to his chest. "Morning, Callie. This is my son, Andrew. He wouldn't stay at home, insisted on meeting your wild horses himself." Callie gave a faint smile and held the door wide. Andrew lingered on the threshold, his gaze darting to the foals, then to the wounded mare, wonder written plain on his face. "Are they wild Mustangs, Dad? Are they really?" "Looks like it," Dr. Briggs replied. "Let's take a look." The next few hours were a blur of motion. Dr. Chatti Briggs knelt beside each foal, his hands quick but gentle, murmuring calm reassurances as he checked their wounds, took their temperatures, and mixed medicine into warm milk replacer. He injected antibiotics with practiced precision. The mare snorted at the smell of iodine, but she didn't lash out, letting Callie stroke her neck while Dr. Briggs dressed her wounds. Andrew watched every movement, wide-eyed, and when Callie's hands began to shake, he quietly handed her a glass of water. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, but didn't speak, just stared at the smallest foal, his eyes shining with worry. "What are their names?" he asked finally. Callie blinked, surprised. I don't know yet." Andrew crouched close to the foals, whispering names under his breath as if testing them. "Dusty, Ember, Willow." The hours stretched on, the storm slowly forgotten as warmth crept back into the cabin. Dr. Briggs explained what to watch for: signs of infection, how to bottle feed the weakest foal, how to keep the wounds clean. He was skeptical, even a little frustrated. "You realize how much work this is. These foals need round-the-clock care. And that mare, she's been through hell." "I know," Callie replied, her voice steady, "but I couldn't leave them." Dr. Briggs studied her, something softening in his eyes. He nodded, then pulled out a notebook and began writing a schedule. "I'll come by every evening, check their progress." Andrew and I will help where we can." Relief washed over Callie, raw and unexpected. For the first time since the war, she felt the smallest glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone with the weight anymore. The day passed in a rhythm of feeding, medicating, cleaning, and watching for any change. Andrew helped more than Callie would have guessed, fetching fresh water, folding towels, sitting quietly beside the foals, and singing under his breath. The animals seemed to draw strength from his presence. Late that night, after Dr. Briggs and Andrew left for home, Callie sat by the fire, staring at the sleeping foals and the battered mare. The silence felt different now, less like a prison, more like a promise. She caught herself thinking of her old unit, of nights spent sharing burdens in places far more dangerous than this. Back then, she'd always felt apart, never quite trusting anyone with her secrets. But tonight, in the glow of the fire, the cabin felt almost like a home again. Outside, the storm was gone. The stars had come out over the canyon, sharp and clear. Callie glanced at the Mustang, who met her gaze with quiet gratitude. "You brought me here for a reason, didn't you? Maybe you saved me too." As she drifted into uneasy sleep, Callie didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She only knew that tonight, a broken soldier, a battered mare, 3 fragile foals, and a boy who believed in miracles had formed the beginnings of something new. A fragile alliance, held together by hope. The days that followed the rescue unfolded like a slow exhale, the tension in Callie's body easing little by little as she settled into a new rhythm. The rain had finally passed, leaving the canyon air scrubbed clean and the land gleaming under a fresh blue sky. Every morning began with a sharp chill, the world outside her window glittering with dew. Inside, Callie's ranch was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. She rose before dawn, drawn from uneasy sleep by the soft nickers of the mare and the restless shuffling of the foals. Sage, she'd finally started calling the Mustang by the name Andrew whispered that first morning, would stand at the door to the old barn, her large dark eyes watching as Callie moved through the pre-dawn light. The wounds on Sage's shoulder and leg were healing, though the scars would remain. She limped less each day, her spirit returning with the growing strength in her stride. The foals had names now, thanks to Andrew. Dusty, the largest, was stubborn and bold, already testing his legs against the fences. Ember, with a coppery streak down her nose, was nervous but clever, always watching before acting. Willow, the smallest and most fragile, stuck close to Sage or to Callie, trusting and gentle. Their different personalities filled the ranch with a new, unpredictable energy. Every day brought 1,000 small tasks: mixing formula, tending wounds, cleaning stalls, checking temperatures. Callie found herself grateful for the structure, the necessity. The routine dulled the sharp edges of her memories. When she caught her reflection in the dusty window, she hardly recognized herself. A woman with hay in her hair, mud on her jeans, eyes alert but softer than before. Andrew became a constant presence, riding his bike over every afternoon after school. He carried a battered notebook, recording every change in the horses, every funny thing the foals did. Sometimes he'd just sit in the straw, letting Willow nibble gently at his sleeve, humming tunes under his breath. "You know, they listen to you," Callie remarked one afternoon, as they worked side by side in the barn. Andrew grinned, glancing up from where he knelt beside Ember. "Maybe they know I was scared once, too." Callie nodded, understanding more than she wanted to say. She saw pieces of herself in Andrew, in his silences, his sudden bursts of laughter. the careful way he moved among the wounded animals. Dr. Briggs visited most evenings, bringing supplies and new stories from town. The first time he stayed for dinner, Callie was awkward, unused to company. But Elliot had a way of filling the space. His low voice calm, his jokes gentle, his questions never pressing too hard. One night, after Andrew had fallen asleep on a pile of old feed sacks, Elliot lingered in the quiet. "You've built something here, Callie?" "Something good." She shrugged, looking down at her hands. "I didn't mean to. I didn't want to leave them." "That's the best reason there is," Elliot replied. He shared stories of his own. A wife lost to cancer, long nights alone raising Andrew, mistakes and regrets that still haunted him. In those moments, Callie felt the invisible lines between them soften. They didn't have to fill the silences with words. It was enough to sit together, the night outside humming with crickets, the gentle snuffling of horses, a steady, comforting background. The ranch became a sanctuary, not just for the Mustangs, but for Callie herself. The daily routines left little room for the old nightmares. Each time she reached for the grain bucket or lifted a trembling foal to its feet, she found her mind returning to the present, her breath slow and steady. Andrew helped her name the scars on Sage's body. "That one's shaped like Texas," he joked, tracing the jagged mark on the mare's shoulder. "See? Here's the panhandle." Callie smiled, tracing the line with her finger. "You've got a good eye." Trust came slowly, but it came. Sage would nudge Callie's hand for carrots now, her wariness giving way to something like affection. Ember let Andrew braid a bit of old ribbon into her mane. Willow would curl up in the straw, her breathing deep and steady, content simply to be near. The work wasn't easy. There were setbacks. Nights when Ember spiked a fever, mornings when Willow wouldn't eat. The wounds on Sage's leg reopened once, sending Callie into a spiral of worry. But each challenge was met together. Elliot was always a phone call away, ready with advice and reassurance. Andrew refused to let Callie give in to despair. "They're fighters," he'd say, brushing Willow's coat with slow, careful strokes. "Just like you." One night, after the foals had finally settled, Callie stood outside, staring up at the blanket of stars. The canyon was quiet except for the soft sounds of life. Horses breathing, crickets singing, the distant howl of a coyote. For the first time in a long while, Callie didn't feel haunted by the past. She felt anchored to something real, something worth fighting for. Sage joined her, stepping up beside her in the darkness. Callie rested her hand on the mare's neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath the skin. "We're still here," she whispered. "We're still here." Inside, Andrew's notebook lay open on the kitchen table, filled with sketches and stories, a record of survival, of hope, of a family that had found each other in the unlikeliest of ways. As the ranch slept, Callie realized that healing, true healing, was not loud or sudden. It was built day by day in the quiet moments, in the work and the trust and the simple act of staying. She was no longer alone. Neither were the horses. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, but tonight, Callie allowed herself to believe in the possibility of peace and in the fragile, stubborn hope that had taken root in her heart. Summer crept quietly into the canyon, baking the rocks by day and painting the ranch in silver at night. The air buzzed with the music of crickets and cicadas, and the foals, now stronger and more playful, tumbled through fields of wildflowers, their laughter bright as sunlight. Sage, healed enough to run but forever marked by her scars, kept constant watch. Her eyes, once dull with pain, were sharp again, scanning the horizon every dusk. It should have been a season of peace. But beneath the calm, trouble was stirring. It started with whispers in town. First, a stranger lingered too long outside the feed store, eyes following Callie as she loaded oats into her truck. Then, late one night, Andrew spotted headlights crawling along the far side of the property, vanishing when he and Callie went to investigate. The next morning, a water trough reeked of chemicals and had to be emptied and scrubbed, the grass around it yellowed and dead. Callie's hands tightened on the fence rail as she stared at the poisoned water. She remembered the old rumors, the ones Dr. Briggs had mentioned about the notorious Marks sisters, Claire and Rhonda, women with a history of cruelty, known for running Mustangs to exhaustion, breaking spirits and bodies for profit. They'd vanished from the county years ago, but cruelty like that didn't disappear. It waited, festering, until it could strike again. She documented everything, snapping photos of tire tracks, poisoned troughs, and the empty cans tossed in the weeds. She made calls to animal welfare authorities, filing reports with slow, bureaucratic voices on the other end of the line. But Callie knew, deep down, that justice, if it came at all, would come too slow. The threats escalated. One evening, as Callie, Andrew, and Elliot finished dinner, Sage whinnied sharply from the pasture. Callie stepped onto the porch and froze. Her barn door stood wide open, swinging in the wind. Inside, she found nothing missing, but the message was clear. Someone had been there. Someone wanted her to be afraid. Andrew shivered, clutching his notebook tight. "Why are they doing this, Callie? Why don't they leave us alone?" Callie knelt beside him, searching his face for fear and finding only stubborn anger. "There are people who don't want to see us win," she said quietly. "But we're not alone, Andrew. We have each other." She wasn't sure she believed her own words, but she held them anyway. The next day brought more evidence. A fence slashed open, hoof prints scattered through the mud, and a crude warning carved into the gate. "Leave them be." Callie's blood ran cold, but she steadied her hands, called the authorities again, and bolted the doors tight that night. Sage's behavior changed, too. She stayed close to the foals, ears flicking at every sound. When headlights flashed on the distant ridge, she reared and snorted, her muscles trembling. Even Willow, usually fearless, began to skitter at shadows. Elliot arrived one evening, his jaw clenched tight. The Marks sisters. He'd heard their names in town, whispers growing louder as word spread about the Mustangs on Callie's land. "Folks are scared," he said. "Some think it's best not to get involved." Callie shook her head, her voice low and calm. "I'm not giving them up, Elliot. Not after everything we've been through." He placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "You're not alone, Callie. We'll fight this together." But the pressure built. One afternoon, as Andrew and Callie worked in the barn, a black SUV crept up the drive. Two women stepped out, Claire and Rhonda Marks, both hard-eyed and mean-mouthed, their faces sharp with anger. Claire spat into the dirt, sizing up Callie with open contempt. "You got something that doesn't belong to you," she sneered, eyes darting to the pasture. "Those horses are ours. Hand 'em over and no one gets hurt." Callie met her gaze, pulse pounding. "You tortured them," she said, voice flat. "You have no claim here." Rhonda scoffed, stepping closer. "You think the law's gonna help you out here, soldier girl? No one's coming. People mind their own business in these parts. Callie stood her ground, refusing to show fear. You need to leave. Now. The sisters exchanged glances, then climbed back in their SUV, tires spitting gravel as they tore away. But Callie knew it wasn't over. It was just beginning. That night, every shadow seemed to hold menace. Callie slept with her phone under her pillow and a flashlight on her nightstand. Sage patrolled the pasture, standing sentinel while the foals huddled close together in the barn. Andrew drew pictures of superheroes protecting horses, whispering stories of bravery under his breath. The next morning, Callie found another warning, barbed wire coiled in the hayloft, where the foals could have easily stepped. Her anger burned, fierce and hot, but she forced herself to act with methodical care. She took photos, logged the incident, and sent every detail to animal control. She didn't let Andrew see her cry that night, hiding her tears in the laundry room. But the next morning, she woke determined. This was her family now, horses and humans both, and she would not surrender. As the sun set behind the canyon, painting the world gold and crimson, Callie walked the fences, Sage trailing at her side. "We're not alone," she whispered. "Not as long as we stand together." And as darkness fell, Callie Walker prepared for the fight that would decide everything. By the time the next week rolled around, the air on Callie's ranch felt like a drawn bowstring, tight, humming with the sense that something could snap at any moment. The Mustang stayed close to the barn, Sage never more than a few strides from her foals. At night, Callie heard the distant growl of engines on the old mining road, saw headlights skitter across the far ridges. She hardly slept, her senses sharp and restless, but fear had been replaced by a cold resolve. Elliot came by most evenings now, parking his truck beside the barn and carrying supplies out back. He brought more than medicine. He brought news. The Marks sisters had been seen in town, loud and belligerent, telling anyone who'd listen that Callie had stolen their horses, that she was unstable, a crazy vet who'd kidnapped wild animals to play rancher. Some folks in town, faced with the sisters' threats and the old rumors about Callie's past, chose silence. They remembered her as the woman who lived alone, who rarely spoke, who sometimes startled at sudden sounds. But others, especially the neighbors whose lives had brushed against hers in kindness or quiet need, began to rally around her. Old Man Patterson offered to patrol the fence lines at night. Mrs. Alvarez, whose daughter Callie had once driven to the hospital after a fall, brought fresh eggs and warm cornbread, her eyes fierce with determination. It's not just about the horses, Callie realized. People are watching to see who we are, what we'll stand for. One afternoon, as Callie mended a section of split rail, a battered Ford pulled up, and two men from the local animal rescue stepped out. They'd heard about the Mustangs, about the threats. "We're with you," one said, handing her a radio. "You see anything, call us. Day or night." Andrew, always listening, always absorbing, started organizing his own patrols with a few kids from school. They made signs, "Protect the Mustangs," and planted them along the road. Andrew's sketches of Sage and the foals began appearing on lockers and bulletin boards at school, sparking conversations among kids who'd never given a second thought to wild horses or what cruelty looked like in real life. But the Marks sisters didn't back down. Instead, they stepped up their campaign, spreading stories through town about Callie. "She's not right in the head," Claire snarled in the feed store. "That soldier's got nightmares. She'll snap one day, you'll see." Some neighbors drew back, worried about trouble. Others, like Elliot, stood firmer. He confronted the sisters once at the diner, his voice steady, his eyes cold. "You come near Callie or those horses again, any of you, and you'll answer to more than just the sheriff." Social media, too, became a battleground. When Callie posted photos of the foals and their recovery, the comments section filled with both encouragement and venom. "You're a hero," some wrote. Others, likely fueled by the sisters, accused her of theft, of stirring up trouble for attention. Callie tried not to read them, but Andrew did, bringing her the kindest notes and taping them to the fridge. "Look, people care," he said, voice trembling with hope. Not everyone believes their lies, still. Tension pressed in. One night, the Mark sisters stood at the end of the drive, headlights glaring, voices echoing across the pasture. "You think you're safe, Walker? This ain't over." Sage bristled, standing between the foals and the fence, every muscle tight. Callie watched from the porch, her heart a cold stone, but she didn't move. She refused to show fear. Inside, Andrew clung to the old radio, his cheeks flushed with anger. Elliot and the animal rescue team stayed late that night, flashlights in hand, circling the property. They drank black coffee in Callie's kitchen, the air thick with quiet determination. They talked of the law, how slow it moved, how easily it was bent by money and threats. But they also talked of hope, and how sometimes the only thing standing between cruelty and kindness was a handful of people who refused to back down. The foals began to thrive, their energy a stubborn light against the darkness pressing in. Dusty was the first to canter across the pasture again, his wild joy infectious. Ember grew bold, venturing farther from the barn. Willow, once so fragile, nuzzled Callie's hand with gentle trust. Their resilience gave the humans strength. Their survival became the heart of a growing alliance. One evening, as Callie and Andrew watched the sun set, Elliot joined them on the porch, his face tired but smiling. "You're doing good, Callie. People see it, even if they're scared to say so. You've given them something worth believing in." Callie watched Sage and her foals, safe for another night, and nodded. Maybe she'd been running for years, hiding from her past, her failures, her pain. But now, with every day, every act of care, she felt herself becoming part of something larger, a community stitched together by small acts of courage. The storm was still coming. The Mark sisters were more desperate, more dangerous than ever. But Callie wasn't alone. Allies stood with her, shoulder to shoulder, drawn together by the fierce, simple act of choosing to care. And as the sky faded from gold to indigo, Callie Walker steeled herself for what lay ahead, knowing that no matter what came, she would stand her ground for the Mustangs, for Andrew, for herself, and for the home they were building together. The air was heavy that night, suffocating and still, as if the canyon itself held its breath. Sage paced near the barn, her hooves whispering across the packed earth, never straying far from her foals. Callie lay fully dressed atop her bed, listening to the chorus of night sounds, the soft nickering of horses, the distant bark of a coyote, the faint hum of crickets. But beneath those sounds, she sensed something darker, a tension that crackled in her bones, refusing to let her rest. Andrew, curled up with a flashlight and a battered superhero comic, kept glancing toward the window, every little noise making him flinch. Elliot sat at the kitchen table, boots on, mug of coffee gone cold in his hands. The radio from Animal Rescue crackled quietly, static and distant voices all that broke the silence. Sometime after midnight, headlights flickered along the ridge. Callie stiffened, eyes narrowing. The old mining road wasn't a place for travelers, not at this hour. A moment later, the radio squawked. Old man Patterson's voice, taut with fear. Movement by the back fence, Callie. 2, maybe 3 vehicles. Callie's mind snapped into focus. Her military training surfacing. Elliot, take Andrew to the cellar, keep him low, lock the door from inside. She moved to the back window, heart pounding, fingers already dialing the sheriff and animal control. The dispatcher's voice sounded impossibly far away. Outside, shadows spilled from the darkness, figures moving fast, ducking low. Someone yanked the barn door open with a metallic screech. Sage screamed, the sound raw, primal. The foals clustered behind her, eyes wide, bodies shaking. Callie grabbed her flashlight, flicked it on, and stepped outside, her silhouette bold against the house lights. "Get away from my horses!" Her voice rang across the yard, steady and fierce. A flashlight beam caught her in the eyes. Claire Marks, unmistakable in her rage, shouted back, "These horses are ours! Get back inside, Walker, or you'll regret it!" Behind Claire, Rhonda and 2 men moved toward the barn, ropes in hand, intent on cornering Sage and the foals. Callie planted her feet, refusing to back down. Not tonight. Not ever. The radio crackled again. Animal rescue was en route. Police only minutes behind. But the fight was already here. Elliot emerged from the cellar with a baseball bat, his face set. "I'm with you, Callie." From the fence line, a neighbor's truck blazed its lights, horn blaring. The rescuers had arrived. 2 men, 3 women, flashlights swinging as they rushed toward the chaos. Claire spat a curse and surged forward, determined to drag Sage out by force. But Sage reared, shrieking, hooves flashing in the glare. Dusty darted behind her, Ember and Willow scattering into the dark. Rhonda lunged, rope swinging, but missed as the foals dodged through the mud, their instincts sharp from weeks of healing and learning to trust. Callie sprinted into the barn, planting herself between the raiders and the trembling horses. "You're not taking them. Not tonight." Claire shoved her, rage twisting her features. "You think you're a hero? You think you can steal what's ours?" Callie didn't flinch. "I think I'm saving lives. Yours included if you don't walk away." A tense standoff hung in the air. 2 worlds colliding, cruelty against compassion, history against hope. It was broken by the scream of sirens racing up the drive, red and blue lights strobing across the field. Cell phones caught everything, the shouting, the flashlights. The Mark sisters caught red-handed by neighbors and police alike. Claire and Rhonda tried to run. But Sage, wild and righteous, blocked their way, her body a living shield. The rescuers, emboldened, closed ranks around the horses. The officers tackled the sisters, hands on weapons, barking orders. Callie collapsed to her knees, trembling as adrenaline faded, relief and exhaustion rushing in. Elliot helped her up, his hand steady on her back. "You did it," he whispered. Andrew burst from the cellar, sobbing with relief, running to throw his arms around Callie. Sage lowered her head, nuzzling his shoulder, the line between human and animal blurred by the terror and triumph of the night. In the aftermath, the officers took statements, cataloged evidence, and loaded Claire and Rhonda, shouting and cursing, into the back of a cruiser. Neighbors snapped photos and filmed, posting everything online. The story exploded by morning. Local woman and Mustang herd survive violent attack, rescue captured on video. As dawn crept over the canyon, Callie and her allies gathered on the porch. silent except for the steady breathing of horses and the soft chirping of waking birds. They watched the sun rise, the world washed clean after so much fear and anger. Sage stood tall in the golden light, flanked by her foals. The little herd, broken, battered, but unbowed, had survived the long night. So had Callie and her friends. And for the first time, Callie felt the eyes of the community, not with suspicion or judgment, but with gratitude and awe. Her story, their story, was no longer a secret battle in the dark. It had become a beacon of courage, of defiance, and of the stubborn hope that refused to die. In the wake of the midnight raid, the ranch was alive with voices and activity. Police tape fluttered in the morning breeze, flashing red and blue lights finally fading as the last of the official cars rolled down the driveway. News vans jostled for space outside the gate, reporters clamoring for interviews. Cameras turning Callie's battered ranch into the center of the region's attention. Callie stood on her porch, the weight of sleepless nights and adrenaline finally sinking into her bones. She watched as officers hauled the last evidence bags, rope, chemical cans, barbed wire, from the barn. Sage and the foals remained close, sheltered behind the sturdy fence, their eyes wide but calmer now. Andrew, glued to her side, still clung to her sleeve, not quite ready to let go. By noon, the headlines were everywhere. Mustang rescue turns violent. Local woman saves wild herd from infamous Mark sisters. Social media exploded with clips of the raid, the police intervention, and most of all, the sight of Sage standing guard over her babies, refusing to yield to cruelty. Messages poured in, some from old friends, many from strangers, offering support, resources, and donations for the horses' care. The Mark sisters, faces grim and defiant, were marched before a judge within the week. The evidence was overwhelming, the videos damning. Their lawyer sputtered about property rights and misunderstandings, but the judge cut through their bluster with quiet fury. "I see only abuse here," she declared, sentencing the sisters to years behind bars and ordering a lifetime ban on animal ownership. The entire town watched the trial unfold. For years, people had whispered about the sisters' cruelty, but justice had seemed distant. Now, as word spread about Callie's stand, the community began to shift. People who once averted their eyes started dropping by the ranch, some with baked goods, others with simple words of thanks. Callie's land, once a place of solitude and old wounds, transformed into something new, a sanctuary. With Elliot's help and the support of animal rescue, she built sturdy new shelters and opened the gates to other animals in need. Abandoned dogs, stray cats, and a couple of half-wild burros soon joined the little herd. At first, Callie worried the Mustangs would resist, but Sage surprised her. She welcomed every newcomer, her patience endless. Word spread to local schools. Teachers reached out, asking if Callie could bring Sage and the foals for a visit, to talk about rescue and hope and standing up to cruelty. Andrew, once shy and quiet, volunteered to help, preparing posters and little stories for the children. The first time Callie led Sage into the gymnasium of the town's elementary school, the room fell silent. Dozens of children stared, wide-eyed, as the big Mustang snorted and stamped, the foals clustered around her legs. Callie spoke softly, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "This is Sage," she said. "She and her babies survived because they trusted when they were afraid. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is reach out for help." Andrew stood at her side, clutching Willow's halter. The little filly nuzzled his shoulder, drawing giggles from the crowd. The children took turns petting the Mustangs, their laughter bright and ringing as they learned about compassion and responsibility. Afterward, a teacher approached Callie, eyes shining with tears. These kids, some of them have seen hard things. You gave them hope. Callie nodded, realizing the truth of it for herself. The horses had saved her as much as she'd saved them. Back at the ranch, Elliot's visits grew more frequent. Sometimes he brought medical supplies, sometimes fresh-baked bread, sometimes nothing but quiet company. The wall between them, once thick with mutual pain and loss, began to thin. They shared late-night talks on the porch, speaking of old wounds and new dreams. One evening, as the sun sank low and the foals chased each other across golden grass, Elliot reached for Callie's hand, his touch warm and certain. "You did something big here, Callie. Bigger than any of us could have alone." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "I couldn't have done it without you, or Andrew, or Sage." Sage, too, changed. Once haunted and suspicious, the mare had become a gentle matriarch, guiding the foals, welcoming visitors, watching over the growing menagerie with quiet dignity. The scars on her body faded, but her spirit shone brighter than ever. The ranch became more than a home. It became a haven for those needing a second chance. Troubled teens came to help muck stalls and build fences, their silences slowly giving way to laughter and trust. Families who'd never set foot on a ranch stopped by with apple slices and stories. One evening, a whole troop of Girl Scouts arrived, eager to earn their animal welfare badges. Sage endured their excited hugs with patience, and Willow let them braid flowers into her mane. Callie watched all this, pride mingling with gratitude. She'd started as an outsider, running from her past, but now she belonged to the ranch, to the horses, to the people who'd chosen to stand with her. As summer faded into fall, the trees along the canyon turned gold and red. Callie found herself dreaming again, of a future shaped not by old pain, but by the hope she'd found in the most unexpected places. The legacy of Sage and her foals rippled outward, touching lives she'd never imagined. And in the quiet of each evening, as the Mustangs grazed and the sky glowed with sunset, Callie felt a new peace settling deep inside her, a sense that, at last, she was truly home. The first chill of autumn drifted through the canyon, bringing with it a hush that seemed to settle on the ranch like a blessing. Callie woke early, bundled in an old Marine Corps sweatshirt, and watched the sun creep over the hills, turning the grass to molten gold. Sage and her foals grazed in the early light, their breath curling in the air, their bodies sleek and healthy after a summer of safety and care. It was almost hard for Callie to remember the chaos of just a few months earlier. The fear, the raids, the sick foals huddled in the dark. The ranch had changed, but so had she. The battle scars on her hands had faded, and so had the old, sharp ache in her chest. She could still feel it sometimes, when the nights were long and silent. But now that pain was joined by something else, a quiet pride and a sense of belonging that felt new and unfamiliar, but deeply right. Callie's phone buzzed on the kitchen table. It was a text from the local veterans group. "Meeting tonight. Would love for you to share your story, Callie. Bring the horses if you can." She hesitated. For years, she'd avoided those meetings, unwilling to relive the past or explain the things she couldn't put into words. But lately, she'd started to realize that her journey wasn't just about rescue. It was about facing down her own ghosts and helping others do the same. That afternoon, she loaded up the trailer, guided by Andrew and a growing circle of ranch volunteers. Sage stepped in first, calm and regal, followed by Dusty, Ember, and Willow. Andrew, taller and more confident than ever, climbed into the passenger seat, his hands steady on the door. At the community center, the room filled with veterans, men and women of all ages, some with obvious wounds, others carrying invisible burdens. Callie felt the old nerves threaten to choke her, but Andrew squeezed her hand, his quiet strength grounding her. She started simply, telling the story of finding Sage that stormy night, of the battered foals, and the long, harrowing rescue. She spoke of fear, and the temptation to walk away, and the way something inside her had refused to let the horses die. As she talked, the room grew silent, the audience hanging on every word. "I thought I was saving them," she said, her voice cracking. "But they saved me too. They made me face what I'd been running from. Made me remember what courage really means." Sage nickered softly, pressing her nose to Callie's shoulder. Andrew stepped forward, telling the group about naming the foals, about watching Willow take her first steps outside the barn, about the way the ranch had become a home for anyone who needed it, human or animal. A Vietnam veteran, his hands shaking, stood up in the back. "What you did, that's what we're all looking for, isn't it? Something to fight for, a place to belong." Callie nodded, her eyes bright. "You don't have to do it alone. None of us do." The meeting ended with laughter and applause. People lingered to stroke Sage's mane, to share their own stories of struggle and hope. A few veterans signed up to volunteer at the ranch. Others left with tears in their eyes, hope flickering where it had once been lost. Back at the ranch, life carried on with its new rhythm. The sanctuary's reputation spread. More animals arrived, some frightened, some aggressive, but all gradually transformed by the care and kindness of Callie, Andrew, Elliot, and the volunteers. The place had become a beacon for those in need of healing. Andrew, once shy and withdrawn, flourished in the company of both people and horses. He led school tours, helped newcomers learn to ride, and kept careful records of every animal's progress. Callie and Elliot grew closer, their friendship deepening into something stronger, built on trust and shared purpose. Some nights, they sat together on the porch, watching the stars and listening to the night, talking about everything and nothing. Elliot told her about his wife, her laughter, her stubbornness, her love for wild things. Callie, for the first time, shared her nightmares, her memories of war, the names she carried like medals and wounds. Together, they created new traditions, bonfire nights for the volunteers, sunrise rides through the canyon, quiet dinners after long days of work. The ranch wasn't just a refuge for animals anymore. It was a gathering place, a home for anyone who needed one. Even the town changed. People who once kept their distance now waved as they passed the ranch. Children brought apples and drawings for the foals. The sheriff stopped by on weekends, sometimes helping mend a fence or haul hay. The old fears faded, replaced by a pride that ran through the community like a new river. The Mustangs, once symbols of pain and neglect, had become the heart of this transformation. Sage led her little herd with grace, showing newcomers how to trust, how to heal. Dusty grew bold and strong, Ember clever and curious, Willow gentle but brave. They visited schools, nursing homes, even town festivals, teaching that hope could grow from the hardest places. One evening, as Callie watched the sun set over the golden fields, Andrew came to stand beside her. "Do you think they remember?" he asked, watching Sage nuzzle her foals. "Do you think they know how far they've come?" Callie smiled, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "I think they do, Andrew, and I think we do too." As darkness fell and the ranch settled into peaceful silence, Callie realized that healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey, sometimes hard, sometimes messy, but always worth the fight. And for the first time in a long while, she felt not just healed, but whole. 1 year to the day since the night Callie followed Sage into the storm, the ranch was more alive than ever. Early morning sunlight spilled across the fields, dappling the wild grass and casting long, golden shadows. The air was brisk, filled with the scent of apples and wood smoke, and the steady rhythm of laughter echoed from the barn to the house and out across the hills. The community had gathered for the anniversary, a celebration of rescue and rebirth, a marker of how far they'd all come. Kids ran wild, their arms full of wildflowers, chasing after Dusty and Ember, who tossed their manes and danced around the pasture. Willow lingered near the fence, accepting gentle pats and offering shy, soft-eyed glances to anyone with an apple slice. Callie stood near the porch, a cup of coffee warming her hands, her gaze sweeping over the scene. She saw Elliot helping set up tables beneath the old cottonwood tree, laughing with neighbors who'd once been strangers. Andrew, taller now and more confident, led a group of children through the pasture, teaching them how to approach the horses with respect and patience. The little ranch had changed everything, not just for Callie and the Mustangs, but for the whole town. Where there had once been suspicion, there was now pride. Where there was silence, there was now song. The morning was filled with memories, some hard, some beautiful, all now woven into the fabric of their lives. There was a display set up near the barn, photos tracing the journey, Sage's battered face staring out of the storm, the first night in the cabin, the rescue in the rain, the bruised foals lying on Callie's kitchen floor. Then came photos of healing, Andrew cradling Willow, Mrs. Alvarez baking bread, Elliot patching fences, kids painting signs that said "Sanctuary for all." Callie wandered over, feeling the weight of the past settle gently on her shoulders. She traced her fingers across the old photos, smiling at the faces, some of whom had moved on, some who still came every week to help out, all part of the unlikely family that had grown here. Midday brought a hush as the community gathered in a wide circle by the pasture gate. Elliot stepped forward, his voice steady and warm. 1 year ago, we stood at the edge of fear and chose hope. This ranch isn't just about horses. It's about what happens when people choose to care, to stand up, and to stand together. He looked at Callie, pride shining in his eyes. It's about finding family, sometimes in the most unexpected places. Callie stepped forward, nerves fluttering in her chest. She took a deep breath, looking around at the faces that had become so dear to her. Andrew, beaming with a confidence she never could have imagined. Mrs. Alvarez, wiping away a proud tear. The volunteers, arms slung around each other, kids clutching their drawings and homemade horse treats. "I used to think strength meant standing alone," Callie said, her voice low but clear. "But it's not. True strength is built on compassion, on persistence, and on the courage to ask for help, even when it's hard. Healing, real healing, takes time and trust. And family, I've learned, is about more than blood. It's about those you choose to stand beside, no matter what storms come." She knelt beside Sage, running a gentle hand along the mare's neck, feeling the steady thump of her heartbeat. This mare saved my life. She reminded me that hope survives, sometimes battered, sometimes bruised, but always worth fighting for. The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of joy and gratitude that seemed to lift the sky. Sage, calm and regal, nickered softly, the foals gathering close as if understanding the celebration was for them, too. As the day unfolded, the ranch became a stage for stories. Veterans stood in quiet circles, sharing burdens they'd carried for years, finding comfort in each other's words. Teenagers from town mucked stalls and brushed coats, laughing and tossing hay. Teachers handed out certificates to children who'd learned about rescue and kindness. A local musician strummed a guitar, his voice weaving old country songs with the laughter of children and the gentle sound of horses breathing. At sunset, as the sky blazed orange and purple, the community came together one last time by the fence. Elliot passed around candles, each person lighting theirs in honor of the journey they'd shared. Andrew read a short poem, his voice shaking only a little. We were lost, but now we're found. We were broken, now we heal. Together we stand, stronger, braver, real. The ceremony ended with everyone gathered around Sage, Dusty, Ember, and Willow. Callie, Elliot, Andrew, the foals, and Sage standing together at the edge of the pasture as the stars began to prick the sky. For a long moment, there was only quiet. The kind that comes when something hard and beautiful has finally found peace. Callie looked around at the faces lit by candlelight, feeling the truth of everything they'd endured. The pain, the struggle, the small moments of grace. All of it had led them here. She knew, deep in her bones, that the legacy of one act of rescue would ripple outward, changing lives she'd never even know. The ranch was a sanctuary now, not just for horses and people, but for hope itself, a place where healing was real, and the lessons forged in fire were passed down, one day, one story, one act of kindness at a time. As the first star appeared above the canyon, Callie took Elliot's hand. Andrew nestled at her side, Sage and the foals close by. Together they faced the new beginning, proof that when hope and love are fiercely protected, they can create a home for all.